What kind of economic systems are best at allowing us to exercise the fact that we are created in the image and likeness of God?
Now keep in mind that if you take tiny steps towards any goal, it's just a matter of when you're going to reach it.
Scarcity is the first lesson of economics. Now, the first lesson of politics is to forget the first lesson of economics.
If you don't provide real, actual value to people in exchange for the money that you're asking for in return, you will lose over time.
We can see the economy as a social web that God has created for people to serve each other with their work.
We have the Word of God that provides for us a foundation for knowledge, for truth, for beauty, for goodness, for dignity and value in human beings. We have the Word of God that provides for us things like this. Ready? Thou shalt not steal.
Ethics on the legitimacy of wealth and entrepreneurship individually. Secondly, postmillennial eschatology, that is, the kingdom of God expands across the earth before Jesus comes back in final judgment. And the link to get those two together is the idea of the pursuit of self-interest leading to widespread economic growth and social transformation.
We'll figure it out.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Christ in Capital, the show that wants to encourage you to love God, love neighbor, and build something. I'm the host, Dustin Johnson, and this episode is going to be fantastic. Well, actually, I just had read an article that my pastor wrote, and it was about the phrase God willing or Lord willing. And so maybe I shouldn't say this episode is going to be fantastic in my intros, because I don't know. This may crash, but if not, I have, or if so, I have David Snyder on the phone, so he can save the episode if I go down in a ball of flames. David, what's up? How are you?
Hi, Justin. I'm having a great evening here in Southeast Tennessee.
Awesome. So you and I actually got connected through Nathan, who is a frequent guest on the show. And we haven't we weren't introduced or anything. I think you commented on one of our posts, and I, as I do sometimes, did a little bit of snooping. And so I saw on your Facebook profile that you actually started your own business, and you grew it over the past, I don't know how many years, we'll get into that. And then you recently sold your business. And so I was like, this is a perfect match for the Christ in Capital podcast, because you're also a Christian. You took your skills and experience, you put them to work, you built your own business, sold it. So that's part of what I want this podcast to be, is encouraging Christians to go out and start their own business. So before we dive into your background, just a little get to know me. What is your favorite app on your phone?
Well, first of all, I don't use my phone as much as I use my iPad, so I'm gonna substitute iPad for that. And I like the BLB app, which I think stands for Blue Letter Bible app, and I use that on a daily basis. And then a close second, unfortunately a little too close because it doesn't sound as holy, is my CNBC app, where I check investment news and that kind of thing. So between those two apps, I spend a lot of time.
Awesome. It's interesting you said that, because I just recently downloaded the BLB app, and I am having trouble. Like that's a complex app. Like you can dig down into like really fine detail into like, the languages, the translations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a remarkable amount of depth to it and content that can be installed. And for example, right now I like running an English Standard Version and a CSB Bible. I can't remember what translation that is, side by side. Mm-hmm. And I find the CSB side to be much more readable, and the ESV, I go back to that to see kind of cross-check translation accuracy and that kind of thing, because I'm certainly not a Greek scholar or anything like that, but I do like to I don't want to be deceived by the translation. You know,
Yeah.
I want to cross-check at least as best I can. And then of course there's commentaries and all kinds of stuff. So it's a great app. I think it's free. I can't remember if I had to pay for it or not. I would gladly pay for it, but
yeah, I think it's free. Yeah.
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 Man, I try to use my my actual like physical Bible as often as I can, but it's so easy. I mean, having the app on your phone is just like, man, technology definitely can be a blessing. So, but talking about technology, let's get into your backstory. Before we talk about like what your business is or was that you started, what's your background? What's your experience in? How'd you get started in the corporate or the business area?
Sure. Well, I'm 53 years old, and so for the last 24 years, I've been running my business. And before that time, I was a real estate broker for about 8 years, and then before that, I was a student in college. So I don't have a thick resume because I've been basically in the same line of work most of my life, and so. But my education was from Bryan College, and I graduated with a business degree at Bryan College.
Okay.
And Bryan College is a Christian liberal arts school in Dayton, Tennessee.
Yeah, I think
listeners are interested.
I think Nathan has a degree from there too, if I'm not mistaken.
I suspect he does. Yes, I seem to recall that.
So then,
I could tell stories about Nathan also, but I don't want to embarrass him. I've known him since he was a little boy.
We'll save that for another episode, and I'll post it without him knowing, and then he can listen to it.
Yeah.
So what is the business? Just can you introduce it to us and how you got started in it?
Sure. The business is a telecommunications, internet, and managed service company for information technology for business to business only. And the business is called RevTel.net, and it was recently acquired by a larger company called Slappy Communications. And Slappy Communications is the name of founder of that business, Bill Slappy. And so they bought the company in January of this year. But we started as a dial-up internet service provider in 1996, if anybody is old enough to remember those days in your listening audience.
Yeah. So you were growing this thing for a while. Was it always in the same form, or did you add like products, services as you went? How did you talk to us about how you
barely recognized?
Go ahead.
It's barely recognizable as the same business as we started as, and part of that was just that as a young man, I think I was 29 years old when I started after my beef real estate career, and I just knew that internet was probably going to be something that was more than a fad, and in those days you had to use a modem and a phone line to connect to the internet. And there was not a local internet service provider in my hometown. And so my brother and I made a rudimentary business plan, and we had intended to be partners in the business. And by the time I had started investing money and actually putting down capital, which for me was all borrowed money at the time, and it was big numbers for me at the time, it was very significant. He decided that he wanted a different career path, but it was a little late for me. And my brother and I are best friends, by the way, to this day. So in case listeners wonder if everything worked out just fine, but we ended up being a sole proprietorship at that time, and started as a dial-up internet service, and it morphed so many different ways over 24 years. I could spend more time than your listeners would be interested in telling all the different ways that we changed the business. But let me just summarize that in technology, you have to try to stay ahead of where the needs are for your market, and be ready to capture that next trend as it develops. And so over the years, that changed the nature of the business from a consumer dial-up internet service business to an IT services business that was built with the basic building block of broadband as the first thing, because everybody had to have that, and then layer services on top of that. And so in the iteration it is now, it's more of a managed service provider company than it is an internet service provider company, meaning managed services is like you go to a business and on a contract basis, you manage all their technology for them, and you make sure that all the system patching and updates and vendor management, internet, telephone service, all that stuff is managed well, so they don't have to think about it. They can just do their business and don't have to worry about the technology side of it. And so there's a sweet spot where a lot of companies are big enough that they need that kind of service, but they're small enough that they cannot really justify hiring that kind of expertise in-house. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the latest iteration of RevTel was, at least at the beginning of 2020.
That's cool. It's interesting to hear how you identify the little niche markets to focus your business on. So you were talking about how you changed the business over time. What was kind of your information source for determining how you stay ahead of the game? Like when you're driving your business and you're trying to make decisions that are going to be valuable in the long run, is this something where you're like, okay, let's look at like popular, I don't know, technology magazines, or just networking with people? How do you know where the market or the industry is going in order to stay ahead of it?
Well, for me, for me, I leverage relationships with peers in the business that were not in competition with me. And so advice I would give to young people that are starting a business is, and I wish I would have done this earlier in my career. I went for the first, I want to say 9 years without doing this, is get involved with whatever trade association or peer groups that you are in and build relationships with your peers, because they are facing the same kinds of struggles, same kinds of issues that you are. And by exchanging information in a non-threatening way, like your local competitors is probably not the place to go for that kind of information. But my business, it was possible to meet with peers a couple of times a year at trade shows and build relationships with people that are not in competition with me, but are in similar businesses. Yeah. And then we would exchange information about what is working in their particular market, what kind of software stack are they using, how are they driving their expenses down, how are they driving their revenues up, and what is the next big thing that they see on the horizon. And so, one example of how that worked really well for my company is I made a connection with another company very similar to ours that operated in Ohio, and they invited my wife and I over for a demonstration of a new technology. And they, because of the strength of our relationship, they just opened up and showed us how to do a very specific new business that is a nice, where I saw where we were going. And I got so much valuable information from them about how to implement that particular. We came back to our local market where it's fresh and brand new. We implemented it, and it's the fastest growing revenue product that we have to this day. And that's, I think, we implemented it about 6 years ago. And so it's that kind of information that, no vendor's going to give you that kind of information. They're going to tell you what, of course, their thing is that they do, a vendor, right, and it's going to be best in their eyes. But the best information is going to come from a similar business that's implemented something similar to what you're using, and you'll get a neutral evaluation. And if your relationship is good, you'll get a truthful evaluation.
Yeah.
And it's a two-way street. We would exchange valuable information as well to help our peers, because we want to help them. We want them to be successful. These are my friends. Mm-hmm. And so the depth of the relationship with the peers for me was how I came up with how to stay ahead.
That's awesome. And, yeah, it's cool. I mean, I've never really thought about it like that. Like if you're talking with people who are in your same field and they're doing the exact same thing, they're technically your competitors. Yeah, they're gonna. I mean, if you have a good relationship with them, they'll probably help you out. But I mean, they've got the same goggles on that you do, and especially in the technology space. Technology is changing so quickly that you can't just stay, up. You can't stay up with the guys around you. You've got to be running
and you
straight
also
ahead.
have to specialize. There's no way you can be the best at everything anymore.
Yeah.
And so you've got to very carefully, at least in my view, you have to pick something and get very, very good at it in your local marketplace and be better than everybody else at that specific thing that you do. So another example of something where we were very early was in 2008. We became a phone company, and we were doing hosted PBX. Hosted PBX is what most people, I think, in businesses are using these days. But in 2008, that was at the front end of a revolution where people were ditching their public switch telephone network telephones and going to voice over IP phones, and then putting private branch exchange features into the cloud. And so we were doing that all the way back in 2008. And that, of course, gave us a significant customer base by the time we got to 2018 to 2020, where the decision to sell was becoming something the Lord was directing us to do, that we thought. So,
okay.
But that was another, huge product for us was hosted PBX. And again, that came through trade show relationships,
right? And
those kinds of relationships I built over the years.
So it is an ISP, or is it not?
We started as an internet service provider, so you could categorize the company as an internet service provider and a CLEC. Some of your I'll give you telco terms that no one, if somebody wants to take a nap on that, that's fine, but that stands for competitive local exchange carrier, and that's a regulatory thing.
Okay.
Another thing that we did is we built a fiber optic network, a small fiber optic network to businesses only in my hometown in Dayton, Tennessee. And so again, the knowledge to know how to do those things didn't come from books, didn't come from websites. It primarily came from peers in the business.
What was the
exchange of information? What
was the industry's take? Or I guess it's not fair to say what's the industry's take, because everyone can think about it differently. But what was your take on the whole net neutrality thing? Like, were you trying to inform people on what that meant? As the whole thing blew up in the public eye in the past, I don't know how long ago that was, 2 years ago maybe?
Well, yeah, it's still an issue. And network neutrality is the idea that all internet traffic is treated equally regardless of the source or destination of the traffic. And so it becomes a kind of a tempest in a teapot in many ways, because what happens is you have a lot of people demanding lower and lower pricing for their internet service, and at the same time demanding that they somehow have ownership over the network that was built through free market capital in order to provide the service. So for my own purposes, I was and am opposed to network neutrality, at least in the sense that I don't think that me as a consumer has any claim over the private property of someone else.
Right.
So if they want to sell me a service and they say, hey, this service only connects to company-owned websites and company-owned streaming TV services, well, I'm free not to buy that service and go to a competitor. It's a very complicated business, though, because a lot of people would immediately say, well, I don't have any competitors. There's only, one service provider in my area.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a real issue. But it's my opinion that the reason we have that kind of issue is because of government interference in the business in a whole host of ways that make building broadband, nowadays building broadband in 2020 is more a game of who can get the most government funding rather than entrepreneurial return on your investment.
Yeah.
And so rather than, the entrepreneur saying, hey, I'm going to spend $10 million to build a fiber optic network in this small city, it's more like, hey, can I get the government to give me $10 million to build a fiber optic network in this small city?
Oh, man.
And if somebody else gets that government funding, of course, that crowds out private funding.
Yep.
Right there.
All of my
and
listeners.
I'm just using 10 million as an arbitrary number. It could be 1 million. It could be 100 million.
Yep.
But that's the situation we're in the broadband business right now. Is it's no longer an entrepreneurial exercise. It's now crony capitalism, the kind of capitalism that I frankly detest, and that is who can get the most government money the fastest.
Yep. All of my listeners at this point are hearkening back to the most recent episode where we talked about the robber barons of the 18th century and how most of them were government-funded monopolies. And they were all just competing for government contracts rather than competing against one another. And it's a similar thing. It's a similar thing.
Oh yeah, it's a terrible, terrible thing that happened to the industry, in my opinion. And I don't know what you do to fix it at this point. So, I talk about those trade associations, and 10 years ago it was very entrepreneurial, very free flowing of information, and there weren't a lot of government types that would show up at these shows. Now you fast forward 10 years, and it's dominated by attorneys and seminars on how to get government funding.
Yep.
And that's irritating to me.
The way I like to think about the whole net neutrality thing, and you could go into the insane details about like what it means and how traffic on the internet works and how you prioritize certain things. But I like to give people an analogy or like a visual. And basically, if you're like playing a game of Tetris and you've got all of these different spires sticking up down at the bottom and they're all different heights. And what you want to do is you want to make everything equal. So you take a bar that's falling and just flat straight across the board, and it's just falling. And it just stops right at the top point, and then all these holes you have under it are inefficiencies. Things that make it more make things more or less efficient and more costly. And if you could break that up and prioritize it and have the different things fall to different levels and charge different prices for the different things based on supply and demand, you got your problem solved.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And one of the issues is going back to hosted PBX itself. So most of the listeners are probably using some type of voice over IP telephone. I am right now. And one of the issues is I ought to be able to pay my internet service provider for priority traffic for my voice packets so that I have a voice conversation without lag. But net neutrality regulations, and if they were fully implemented, would make that illegal. So it would be illegal to get a working voice service that you could use. So there's a lot of really silly stuff that goes along with the political phrase net neutrality that people don't realize. We do need some discrimination in delivery of internet packets, or we're going to give up good service.
Yep.
And
that's what the regulators or the government likes to do is they market their using terms. They use terms that sound good. Net neutrality. It's neutral. Everyone, it's for everyone. But
right.
And as we saw 2 years ago, and people latch onto it. And they're like, oh yeah, neutral, equal across the board. I'm all for it.
It sounds like a very democratic thing. It sounds like something that, but at the end of the day, it's government trying to get involved in something that they really shouldn't touch. They should keep their hands off of it and let the free market take care of business.
Yeah.
Another example that was kind of frustrating in my career was we actually had government-funded competition with us. So we started in 1996, and in 2003, the government of Chattanooga, Tennessee, decided that they were going to build the world's largest publicly owned, and I say public in quotes, that means government-owned, fiber optic network. And they did so. and they spent $511 million to do it. That people don't think about the $511 million that everyone now has to pay for basically the rest of their lives. They just think about, I get internet at 100 megabit per second and I only pay $39 a month for it.
Right.
Well, the true cost of that is hidden, and then the other cost is it drove out all the competition in
Right.
the city of Chattanooga, Tennessee,
Right.
and so it's unintended consequences. It's well-meaning people that do these things,
Yeah.
but in the end, they are killing the free market economy, which I think is just a terrible thing to do. I think it's a violation I think it's a violation of the way God set up the economy.
Yes.
And it's a government getting outside their sphere of influence and doing something they really shouldn't be doing. They should be protecting private property rights, not invading on private property rights.
David, I think you're getting me to want to invite you back on for another episode. We got some other things to talk about.
It's a pet peeve of mine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but anyway,
so
it's something that I think it's a detriment to the deployment of broadband to this day.
Yeah.
And it's just a shame.
Yeah. So as you're developing your business, and we're going back to your backstory.
Sure.
What was the biggest risk that you took starting the business? You said you started it with your brother. When you're looking out over
the biggest
landscape,
risk I took was not having a correct business plan. Frankly, in those days, I didn't have the skills necessary to make a business plan that made sense. I learned those skills later in my career.
Okay.
And so the inadequate planning, it was inadequate in counting the true cost of what it was going to take to get this business launched. And in those days, the information, even though the internet had started, there was not nearly as much information available there is today in regards to how capital works, where to raise capital, how to build a business plan. There weren't the software packages that were available. So what happened was, frankly, I thought I was going to need approximately $30,000 before I turned a profit as a dial-up internet service provider. And it turned out that I needed closer to $200,000 to turn a profit.
Oh, wow.
And all that money was funded on personal credit cards. And so I would say to listeners, don't do as I did. That's probably not the way to start a business. But on the other hand, God blessed us anyway.
Yeah.
In spite of those errors, my wife and I often talk, we have so many stones of remembrance in regards to our business throughout the years where, we made all kinds of mistakes that could have cost us our business, but they never did because there was always providentially things that occurred that showed us the way.
Awesome.
And but that was a big challenge was reaching that initial break-even point into profitability. And those were some lean times and a lot of oatmeal eating at night and a lot of giving up, anything other than the bare necessities.
Yeah.
And because it all was put into the business.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, it's encouraging to hear those types of stories though, where, you come down to the wire and things get a little bit tough, but then it works out in the end. And I don't know, I mean, you wouldn't change it. I don't think.
No. But if I had to do it again, I would start with a more realistic business plan and know, what I'm getting into first.
Yeah.
I'll give you one example, a miraculous example. And this would have been probably about 1998. We had used every bit of copper in the largest building in downtown Dayton, which is just a 4-story building, but we'd used it all. And when I say copper, I mean phone lines. In those days, you actually had to have a phone line to provide service. And in order to get profitable, we had to add more modems to our modem bank and add more customers. And AT&T told us they would refuse. They refused to sell us any more phone lines because we'd used all the phone lines in the building, and they had no access to the building. And to make a long story short, we went prayerfully around that building, looking desperately for conduit and entrances into the building, and we found an unused 3-inch conduit and snaked it out, which took a tremendous amount of effort, and proved that went into the telecommunications closet. Nobody even knew the conduit was there. So that was one of those things that, yes, of course it was there before we looked for it, but it was providential that we were able to find it, and that enabled us to stay in business. And
awesome.
And so that was just it was a God thing, and to this day we're very thankful for it.
That's awesome. You, how would you say that your business has affected your walk with Christ? Has it made you lean on Him a little bit more? I mean, it sounds like, when you get down to these tough situations, I mean, you don't really have much else to, anything else to do other than just pray and hope and remain faithful.
There's a lot of prayer that goes into these things. And I'll tell you that one of the things I would encourage listeners is when your friends are starting a business, don't be negative. I had friends who came to me when I started my business, and you don't realize where people are. I mean, we're down to our last dollar basically, and they're coming in to tell us how they would have done this, but we knew it would fail or something like that. And it's just very discouraging. Yeah. You don't want to be discouraging to each other. You should be encouraging and realistic. But as far as our walk with the Lord, one of the things I've learned in my business career is that all these things we do are sacred. In Christianity, for some reason, there's this disconnect, and a lot of Christians think that their jobs or their vocation or their business is this thing that they do over on the side, and so they can just pay the bills and get it out of the way so that they can do things for God over here, like on church or witnessing or that kind of thing, not realizing that all of it is the calling. So 100% of it belongs to God, and that's your church attendance, that's your witnessing, but it's also your vocation, it's your business, it's how your relationships with other people. It is all under the authority of Christ as far as I am concerned. And I think when we think of our businesses and our calling as a holy thing, I think we will do a better job for our customers. We will do a better job in our relationships, and hopefully it'll drive us to prayer in all the decisions that affect this thing that God, for whatever reason in His providence, has called us to do.
That's awesome.
I think it should be done well.
That's awesome. That's so good. That's that's what this podcast is all about. He called us to be gardeners. That was our original design. We're gardeners. We're making the world better. We're providing value. We're beautifying the world. And a lot of that's
that dominion mandate, right?
Right?
I mean, it was there in creation, and it was reiterated after the flood. We're not to be sitting on our laurels, and we're not to be, we are creative beings. We're here to provide. And by the way, this whole free enterprise system, that's God's invention. That's not man's invention. The laws of economics are the laws of economics because that's what He made them to be.
Yes.
And so we need to get out there and go after that low-hanging fruit of the marketplace and say, this area right here, telecommunications in Dayton, Tennessee, this is the corner of the world of dominion for David and Donna Snyder in Dayton, Tennessee. That's what God's given us to do, so let's go out and do it the best we can.
That's awesome.
And I think if all of us looked at our vocations that way, as the holy work of God, I think Christians would be the very best at everything that are out there, or the best they can be. Because once you realize that you're working for the King, then the perspective on what you do as a holy enterprise comes in there, and it just drives you to want to be the best at that. And so that's kind of what we learned over the years through a lot of bruises and bumps and mistakes, but always coming back and always being in prayer. Because if God does want you in the work, He's going to providentially provide a way that you're going to stay in the work. Right?
Yes.
And so, and again, I could take up so much of your time your listeners' time with stories over and over and over and over again where those things came together for us. And it's all because of prayer and I'm not saying we're perfect. There's a lot of resentment and rebellion that goes along with our work lives, but for the most part, every day I am excited about the work day, and I'm looking forward to get right back in the trenches and get going again. And I think that when I see Christians, younger men, that kind of thing, that don't have that particular work ethic, I would just want to encourage them that is your calling. Whatever it is that God has called you to, that's your calling, and get in there and do it well. And
Awesome.
And they're going to see their careers advance. I mean, It's just going to happen because it's hard to find people with that kind of attitude in today's world.
And we should be, as Christians, that should be our drive. Like the conference that you were just at, and this is something that David and I talked about prior to starting recording, but fighting, laughing, and feasting. We fight with joy. That's what we're doing. I mean, that should be the Christian's MO. So,
yes, the Fight, Laugh, Feast conference over there at Cross Politics Studios. They have very sound teaching as far as I'm concerned at the conference, and their guest speakers were amazing. They had a couple of business guys. Greg Bonson was in particular very, very impressive. He's I think he is an investment advisor, and he started his own investment group.
David.
Do I have that right?
David Bonson.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's David Bonson.
Greg Bonson's son. Yeah, he's a mutual fund manager, hedge fund manager.
Yep.
Yeah, super successful. He was just named like top 200 or something like that investment advisors in the United States. But
so there's an example of someone that his faith is driving his commitment to doing a job well, and he's much more eloquent than I am. But I think the message that he delivered is very similar to, and I found it affirming to listen to him at the FLF conference, which is Fight, Laugh, Feast, because it was an affirmation of, yes, God, I know that God has been doing this in my life as well, on a smaller scale, but nonetheless, it's something that I'm very thankful, for.
Yep.
And
awesome. Well, we're going on something like 40 minutes now. I don't know, but man, this was so good. I hope everyone that's listening to this that has like their own craft, or they're like contemplating jumping out on their own with their skills or their just their interests, whatever they're doing. I hope they listen to this and they get that extra, kick in the pants to get going. Yeah, it was so good. Thank you, David, for joining me to talk about this. I was
happy to do it.
These types of conversations need to be had because I think people they get in this mindset that I just need to like make some money, get safe, and then just ride it out from there. And I don't think we're called to do that. So, all right, everybody.
I don't think so either. But what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. That sometimes gets us off our posterior side and out working.
Yep.
But and then once you get into that, you realize that work can be a prison if you're not doing it as unto the Lord. If you don't see it as your calling, you're going to be miserable.
Right.
And so I would encourage everyone, regardless of vocation, to get in there and see it as their calling and pray about that. And if it's not your calling, ask God what your calling is, and ask Him to direct you there, because He'll do that too.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Go like and subscribe to the podcast. Go get in contact with David. David, Facebook, Instagram. How do you
I'm not on Instagram. I'm not much of a Twitter guy. If someone wants to reach out to me, the best way to do so would be to email me, and they can use my david@ddsnyder.com.
Okay. I'm glad you're brave enough to put your email out there. I'm not liable for the barrage of emails that you get if you do. So,
well, I understand, but that's not the only email I have either, Justin.
Okay. So you can shut it off if you need to.
Yeah.
All right. All right, everybody. Go love God, love neighbor, and build something. Talk to you later.